Okay, so today we're diving into, well, it's a bit of a geopolitical minefield, isn't it? The Russia-Ukraine war. But, and stick with me here, we're going beyond the usual talking points.
Yeah, we're lucky enough to have stumbled upon this really insightful article from a Ukrainian analyst, and it's fascinating because it was written for a Ukrainian audience.
So we're getting a raw, unfiltered look straight from, folks who are living this conflict every day.
Exactly, it pulls zero punches. It's called Blind Spots of Western Policy, from colonial templates to the reality of war.
Catchy, right. But seriously, when I saw that title, Blind Spots, I knew we had to unpack this.
The article argues that these blind spots are actually shaping the war's trajectory,
Yeah.
like these misconceptions are having real-world consequences.
So let's not waste any time. Hit me with the first blind spot.
This whole idea of red lines and the
Yeah.
West being terrified of provoking Putin,
Right, like he's some kind of, what is it, a bull about to charge.
it's this fear-driven approach to the conflict. And the article argues that these red lines are more of a Western invention than anything based in reality.
Hold on, so you're saying these lines we're so afraid to cross don't even really exist? At least not for Putin.
That's the argument. This fear, this hesitation to give Ukraine what it needs to actually win, it might be doing more harm than good.
So backing down makes him more aggressive. How does that work?
The article dives into Putin's motivations, and it boils down to self-preservation. This isn't some ideologue driven by some grand vision. It's much more basic than that. He sees weakness, and that's an opportunity.
So classic bully mentality. Appeasement just emboldens them.
Exactly. This isn't to say we need to be reckless, but the article suggests that strength deters, weakness provokes.
It's a scary thought. You know what else is scary? This whole idea the article brings up about the West being more afraid of Putin's fall than his actual victory.
That's a tough pill to swallow, but
Mm-hmm.
the article argues that there's this underlying fear of what a post-Putin Russia looks like. It's almost like, and I'm simplifying here, but it's almost like we prefer a stable dictator to an unstable unknown.
So we're okay with the devil we know, even if that devil is, actively committing war crimes.
The article points to this pattern in Western policy that seems more focused on containing the fallout of a post-Putin Russia than on actually stopping him now. It's like we're prioritizing stability at any cost, even if it means propping up a dangerous regime.
And to make matters worse, the article claims we're clinging to these outdated views of Russia itself. This perception that it's too big to fail, too powerful to be truly defeated.
Right, these colonial templates that the title talks about. Like, we still see Russia through this lens of inherent greatness and importance, almost like they're destined to be a major player on the world stage no matter what.
Are they saying we can't see Russia for what it is today?
Essentially. And this feeds into some dangerous assumptions, like the hope for a swift democratic transition after Putin. Like, just remove the dictator and bam, instant democracy.
Which history has shown us time and time again is not how any of this works.
Exactly. And then there's the whole balkanization fear that gets thrown around. Like, if Russia collapses, it'll just descend into chaos.
It's like that word is meant to scare us, but nobody actually explains what they mean by it.
The article breaks down how that fear of balkanization comes from a flawed understanding of what happened in the Balkans. It wasn't just some explosion of nationalism. It was driven by the same imperial ambitions that we see driving Russia today.
Okay, so far we've got a misreading of Putin, this outdated view of Russia as this inevitable power, and maybe even a fear of a Ukrainian victory. That's a lot to unpack just in these first few pages.
And we're just scratching the surface here. Remember, this is just one article, one perspective. But it's a perspective that challenges a lot of assumptions we might not even realize we have.
And sometimes a little discomfort can be a good thing, right? Forces us to look at things from a new angle.
Absolutely. So it would be easy to walk away from this feeling kind of overwhelmed, right? Like, how are we supposed to untangle all of this?
Yeah, it can feel a little like, well, we're trying to solve a puzzle, but we don't have all the pieces, do we?
But the article doesn't just point out the problems. It digs into why the West seems to struggle so much with understanding Russia.
And that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? It can't just be bad intel, right? We're talking about decades of research, think tanks, expert analysis. What are we missing?
Well, the article suggests it's a mix of things. Historical baggage, intellectual trends, maybe even a bit of self-preservation in certain circles.
Okay, break that down for me.
It starts with what the article calls colonial biases. This idea that, consciously or not, the West still views a lot of the world through a very specific lens.
Okay, so like we're projecting our own history onto other countries, not seeing them for what they are today.
Exactly. And then on top of that, you've got the influence of certain leftist intellectual trends that the article argues have downplayed Russian imperialism for decades.
And I gotta be honest with you, that's a phrase I've heard before, but I'm not sure I totally get it.
Right, and the article is very clear that it's not about labeling an entire ideology. It's more about looking at how certain schools of thought within Western academia and policy circles have historically been hesitant, even reluctant, to call out Russia as an aggressor, even when the evidence is staring us in the face.
So it's like these intellectual frameworks, while maybe well-intentioned, create blinders. We can't see the reality because it doesn't fit the narrative we've built.
It's like that.
Yeah.
And to make matters worse, a lot of our understanding of Russia comes from the field of Russian studies,
Yeah.
right? Which, logically, if you want to understand a country, you go to the experts, right?
Yeah, you'd want the people who have dedicated their lives to studying this, who speak the language, who understand the nuances. But that's part of the problem, isn't it?
The article argues that Russian studies has been heavily influenced, if not dominated by, Russian perspectives, often at the expense of other voices, Ukrainian voices being a prime example.
It's like trying to understand, I don't know, jazz music, but you only ever listen to the trumpet player.
It's like that. You're missing the full picture. And that's a problem because it means the information, the analysis that's feeding into Western policymaking is inherently skewed.
It's like trying to navigate with a map that's only half drawn. You might get to your destination eventually, but you're going to run into some serious obstacles along the way. So we spent a lot of time, really digging into these blind spots, these assumptions that shape how the West views this conflict. But the article doesn't just leave us hanging, does it? There's got to be a path forward, right?
Oh, absolutely. It lays out a call to action for both the West and for Ukraine. It's a tough roadmap, but it's there.
All right, let's hear it. What does this Ukrainian call to action look like?
Pragmatism. That's the core of it. They're saying it's time to move beyond just appeals to values, to morals. Ukraine needs to convince the West that supporting them, that ensuring their victory, is in everyone's best interest.
So less about doing the right thing, more about showing the West what's in it for them.
Exactly. It's about speaking the language of realpolitik, highlighting the very real dangers of a victorious Russia, the instability it would create, the risks to global security. These are things that directly impact the West, their interests, their security.
And to do that, we need to dismantle this whole Russia's too big to fail narrative.
100%.
Yeah.
They're basically saying, hey, we need to be louder, more present on the world stage. We need to challenge these outdated ideas about Russia and offer a new perspective.
But it's not just about speaking up, is it? It's about making sure those voices are heard, understood.
Exactly. It's about educating the West, about Ukraine, its history, its culture. It's about showing that this isn't some monolithic region. There's diversity within Ukraine and within Russia, and we need to understand that.
Because if we don't understand that, if we buy into this idea of a single, unified Russian identity, well, it makes it a lot easier to accept these narratives about Russian power being inevitable.
It's about exposing the cracks in that narrative, because then you can start to see the potential for change, both in Ukraine and within Russia itself.
Okay, so changing minds, challenging perceptions. But the article also talks about looking beyond the usual suspects for support.
It does. They say it's time for Ukraine to diversify, reach out to the global south, to countries that understand what it means to fight for their place in the world.
Countries that have been on the receiving end of colonial ambitions themselves.
Exactly. Find common ground in those shared experiences, in that struggle for self-determination.
It makes sense, but it also requires a tremendous amount of effort. And even then, there are no guarantees, right?
It's a long shot. But the point is, they're not giving up. They're acknowledging the possibility of a long conflict and looking for ways to survive, to persevere.
And they bring up those historical comparisons, the Israeli model, the Chechen scenario, neither of which is particularly, well, comforting.
Not at all. But it's about facing reality head on. And ultimately, the article's message is one of, well, if not hope, then maybe resilience, maybe determination.
They're saying Ukraine's survival depends on their ability to adapt, to become a nation that's prepared for the long haul.
And it's a good reminder that, even though we might be watching this from a distance, what we do, the choices we make, they matter. They have an impact.
It's a lot to process. This whole deep dive has been, well, I don't know about you, but it's been eye-opening.
Absolutely.
And as always, we encourage you, our listeners, to go deeper. Seek out this article. Read it for yourselves. Because the more we understand, the better equipped we are to, well, to navigate the world we live in, right?
I think that's a great place to leave it.
It's a lot to think about. Until next time, keep learning, keep questioning, and yeah, we'll see you out there.